So, Wendigoon recently released a video about the lore of Lethal Company, and in it he proposed a theory I really liked. If you haven't watched this video, I highly recommend it, as there's a lot of information in it that I just didn't know. So, one theory that he proposed in this video was actually proposed by a different YouTuber about 11 months ago. However, that video is now unlisted, and you are unable to see it without a link to it. Both of the theories boil down to this. The same creature that eats the scrap and lives in the company building 8 planets and 8 moons, and now spits out reanimated flesh bags, or rinds, to carry out its bidding and to collect more loot for it. And so we are playing as the reanimated flesh bags of Sigurd and his crew. I promise this makes a lot more sense in Wendigoon's video, but that's the absolute bare bones for it. I really like this idea, but I do want to expand upon it, ask several important questions, and I just have one small nitpick of the theory. So first, let's break it down. We can see that the creatures on these moons have experienced rapid evolution and that the moons are completely abandoned. According to the logs, we know that these moons have had these creatures for several hundred years, and the masked enemies tell us that other crews have been here before us. The small nitpick I have with Wendigoon's theory is this. In his video, he proposed the idea that maybe the Bracken and the Forest Keeper were evolved humans who experienced the same level of evolution that creatures like the Bunker Spider have. Now, my friend was actually the one who told me why he disagreed with this theory, and it boils down to this. When you have a creature like a spider that can live for as short as a year, in 500 years you're going to have 500 generations, and you're going to have hundreds of kids per generation. But with a human, you can have a maximum of less than 50 generations, and rarely more than just one kid per generation. So it doesn't really make sense for you to have a creature like a human to experience such insane evolutionary differences in less than 50 generations compared to a spider that just grew in size, you know? However, just because the Bracken and Forest Keeper aren't necessarily caused by humans doesn't mean we can just throw out the entire theory. Anyway, now for my important questions. Why do the turrets shoot the player, but nothing else? What about the landmines? How come they only blow up when a player steps on them? And why can the ship's computer disable these things temporarily? Well, let me propose something. Say if the humans living on these moons were aware of the planet-eating creature, and they created these machines of war, using the moons to mine out resources to make them. They begin a war against the creature and it starts to retreat. The humans lose track of it and are now searching. The creature, with the ability to reanimate the dead and spew out resources, crafts teams of underlings to collect food for it. Now, at some point, the humans then become aware of where this creature is and decide that the best course of action is to not attack the creature, but rather starve it out. So they purposely abandon these resource-rich moons and leave behind scrap as bait. The humans leave behind loot in these buildings because they're aware that this planet-eating creature requires loot to live. They're trying to starve it out. That's why the turrets shoot the players, that's why the landmines explode when players step on them, and that's why all these creatures are inside of these facilities. It's because they want these flesh bags to die trying to collect loot, so the monster is eventually starved out. It's not that people were chased off these moons, right? It doesn't make sense that the humans living on these moons were smart enough to make turrets that can just shoot when they see a player, or landmines that can explode when a player steps on them. But we're too dumb to just make a turret that shoots anything that moves, set up a Bluetooth turret, turn it on after they've left the facility, and had it mow down anything that moves for a week. That just doesn't make sense to me. I think they purposely abandoned these moons and left these creatures on the moons knowing that they would continue to evolve to become more and more dangerous, so that these flesh bags would eventually all die out and the planet-eating monster would run out of rinds to use. Now, if I had to guess how stuff like the turrets and the landmine works, it would be something like this. Either the planet-eating monster, when reanimating the dead, leaves behind some sort of energy signal that the humans were able to pinpoint and use to program the turrets to fire when they saw it, kind of like infrared. Or these turrets and landmines have to scan for both a heartbeat as well as radio signals, right? Otherwise, the turrets would just explode whenever a mask steps on it because of the radio signals, but no heartbeat. Or it would just keep shooting at dead bodies when emitting, just a radio signal. And if it only went after heartbeats, then something like a thumper, which we assume has a heart, would explode the moment it steps on a landmine. If I had to guess how both the turrets and the landmines work, I would guess it has something to do with how the reanimation process happens. The same way that we have heartbeats and that we have heat signals, I believe that this creature, when it reanimates the dead, leaves behind a mark that these future humans figured out how to pinpoint and accurately trace. And so they programmed these turrets to look for this signal, right? And maybe they bred these creatures on these planets, these monsters, to target said signal. And so once a player dies, this planet-eating creature's mark has now left their body, and that's why a mask, even moments after dying and its body would still be warm, can walk right past a turret and they don't get shot at. What about with creatures that don't really have, technology that can scan for this signal? What about them? Well, my guess is that creatures like the Bracken and the Jester were bred to target the player or are mechanical creations, right? Obviously, stuff like the Spore Lizard aren't made for that, but other creatures like the Bracken or the Jester are very, very different. See, if you watch this video on the AI of the Bracken and the Jester, you will find out they are basically instantly aware of when the player enters the building. And in fact, they can tell where the player is looking, and they will purposely have strategy. Even if I'm 100 miles away and I'm still in the same building as the Jester, it will try to get to me as fast as possible. I highly recommend checking out Alter Ego's videos on the AI of these creatures. It is super informative, very well made. But obviously, this isn't like a lore reason as to why the creatures can find you. This just helps you understand how the game works. But just because there might not necessarily be a lore reason right now that we know about, doesn't mean we can't make up our own that still fits in. So my guess is the same way that some snakes can see heat and will purposely kill anything emitting heat, is how the Bracken senses you. It is following almost heat trails across the building, and they can tell when you've entered the building because maybe you have a distinct smell. We can see in the logs that these players have a crazy odor, alright? This guy talks about how they smell like rotting corpses, which is another hint that we may be reanimated rotting corpses. But it's very possible that we have such an aroma that once we enter the facility, basically any creature knows we're in there almost instantly, right? And so it's very possible that either the Bracken just has very incredible hearing, and so it can hear the doors opening once the player enters the facility, and that's how it knows, or maybe the Bracken just feels footsteps on the floor. Either way, it purposely hunts the player, and it's aware when we're in the building, and it's aware of when we've left. And I think this is on purpose, especially the Jester. The Jester isn't just a creature, it's not just a monster, it's just not a mindless beast. It is something that has been designed, and I believe it is for good reason. I believe both the Jester, the Nutcracker, and the turrets are all related. I believe they all came from the same core idea. These humans wanted a way to kill the flesh bags, but they needed to find the most effective way, and the best way to do that was to spread out all of their methods, right? It's very hard to make one product that can do it all. Let's think about cars here real quick. How likely is it that a car company could make a luxury car with a 0 to 60 of 3 seconds with 800 horsepower that gets 50 miles per gallon, is all-wheel drive, all while being a convertible car that fits 8 people? It's just not possible. What is more possible is getting a Lexus for the luxury and the convertible top, a Hellcat for the horsepower, a Prius for the gas mileage, and then any 3-seater SUV. Think about how much easier it is to design one product that does one thing well and then mass producing it. Think about how difficult it is to just make even complex manufacturing stuff for us right now. I mean, the majority of CPU and computer chips are produced in a single factory in Taiwan. Think about how much more complex it would be to get an entity that can see players when they aren't moving, tell if they're alive or dead, follow them, and know wherever they are in the facility, all while being immune to all forms of damage. Now try mass producing it and shipping it to several moons, all without your crew dying. Instead, they divided up the labor and made it so when they were all together, they had a perfect team that made it nearly impossible to survive this situation. However, it's also possible that these entities were just made at different points in time. Maybe they first started off with the turret, but realized, oh, we can't make it move and spot players, so they decided to make the Nutcracker. Except for the Nutcracker was only able to spot players that were moving, and so they had to go with something else, and the Nutcracker was killable, unlike the turret. And so they made the Jester, which is unkillable and can always find the player, but it just has such a long time before it can actually start attacking the player. There's a very long wind-up phase. And so they had to keep creating more and more creatures, and eventually said, okay, well, clearly we can't just make one creature do it all, so let's just, throw everything at the wall and hope that eventually one creature kills it. So they released Thumpers into the building, they released the Bracken into the building, they had the Nutcracker, they had the Jester, they had the turrets, the landmines, the spike plates. They just kept going until eventually they figured that it was good enough or they couldn't fit anything else. So my guess is either these were made at separate times, maybe a couple years apart, to solve the same issue, and they kept going through iterations to try to solve the same thing, or they designed all three of these things independently to reach the same goal, and they each just have different methods of getting there. Now for some other things I want to theorize on and answer. Why can the ship control doors and disable turrets and landmines? Why do old birds kill indiscriminately? Why not just nuke the company building and kill the creature? And why does the company throw us out when we don't hit quota? Okay, here's my proposed ideas in order. So chances are the turrets and the doors are controlled via radio signals, right? We already know that the ship has an ability to transmit some sort of signal to the players once we buy the transmitter device. And the ship already has an ability to see inside of the facility wherever the players are. So chances are the ship just uses some sort of radio signal and the turrets just happen to use the same radio signal, right? The same way if I buy a walkie-talkie and my friend buys a walkie-talkie of a different brand, but we're on the same channel, we can still talk to each other. Now for the old birds. So lore-wise, we know that there was this England capital, it got destroyed, and it's thought to be the Bumic military. But that doesn't really matter. What I think happened was that the Bumic military realized this planet-eating entity existed, and they decided, oh, well, okay, I guess we can't have an all-powerful empire when we have this planet-eating monster on the loose, and so they decided to team up with the rest of the humans and offer the old birds essentially as protection. The facilities, the mansions, these all exist as refugee locations or as resource gathering places. And so the old birds existed and went to these areas to protect them while we had these crazy creatures like the Leviathan, like the eyeless dogs. These things existed to kill them when they came out at night to buy the people enough time to come up with a new strategy or just to prepare the facilities with all the traps to kill the flesh bags. And so eventually, once these people left, they just turned the old birds on from, a defense mode to just straight up offense. And so they just left them behind as part of the trap. If you didn't know what the old birds did, you'd probably just assume, oh, it's, some dead robot, right? But if it activates the moment you steal one of those valuable pieces of loot from the facility, makes it a lot harder to get out, right? And so it's possible the old birds were way before the planet-eating monsters' time, and so they just didn't have time to give them this technology that allows them to see the radio signals or the life force that the planet-eating monster gives the flesh bags. And so that's why it just kills everything that moves, or just everything in general, because it doesn't have the technology to do otherwise. 3. If we go by Wendigoon's theory, it could be because the creature can be in multiple places at once. So the moment the humans just got close, the creature teleports away. Or it's possible that the humans have tried it, but the radiation did nothing to the creature. I mean, think about it. If it can eat a moon, it can probably eat a nuke without too much issue. It's also possible that maybe the monster isn't in multiple locations at once, but it does just have teleporters so it can move around as if it does. We already have teleporters for the players, so it makes sense that the creature has teleporters of its own. There's just too many answers that it could be. 4. Okay, this is my favorite question, and I asked it for a very specific reason. So, there's this game called Genetic Cars 2, and the idea is every time the simulation runs, a set of cars with randomly generated futures will spawn and try to get as far as possible. Each time the cars finally stop moving and have reached as far as they can get, the simulation runs again and it clones the most effective and fastest or furthest traveling car, and it just gives it random little changes. So what if the Lethal Company creature is doing this? What if it is trying to make the most optimal team, and each time you reach a quota, you are breaking new and new records, and once we fail, it kills us and it starts us over again with minor, indistinguishable differences made. Maybe that's a new set of memories, and that's why Sigurd has been having trouble holding everything together. Maybe it's with new crew dynamics, or maybe it's something more meta where, each time the player plays, you as a person playing the game receive more knowledge and understand the game better, and that's why the player gets further and further. Or maybe it's a way to keep us from being docile, right? If they always kept the quota at 300, you would have no reason to go above 300. But if it continually goes higher and higher, and so eventually you'll have a $3,000 quota, and so in those 3 days you'll have earned more than 10 other quota cycles. And so eventually you'll reach a point where 3 days is effectively 30 of early game progression. Or it could just be that the monster is trying to jumpstart evolution. If we constantly have these life cycles, we're constantly being exposed to these moons, which we know have high levels of radiation. With us constantly dying and being reanimated, we just keep going and going and going, and maybe the creature thinks that this will force us to evolve to be better loot collectors. Obviously, that's not really how evolution works, right? But, I mean, it's a planet-eating creature, we don't know how smart it is. So basically, the company just throws us into space to kill us quickly, and then it teleports our bodies, which we know it has teleportation tech, to teleport us back to its main base for it to just reanimate us and do this all over again. Anyway, in short, giant monster eats a planet, throws up flesh bags to collect loot. Humans tried killing it, but settled for trying to starve it out by killing its servants, and that's why there are traps everywhere with random loot. The creature kills us when we fail and starts the cycle anew to try it with something different. Or maybe in hopes that since there will be multiple cycles, we will evolve as fast as the creatures on these moons have, so it sets the quota higher and higher until we fail, and the quota is just a bar to measure how fast we're evolving. The creatures are mainly beasts, are just evolved creatures that didn't originally pose a threat to the old humans, but do now to us. And creatures like the Bracken and Jester were designed to kill flesh bags. If you disagree with my theories or Wendigoons, I'd love to know why. It's very possible and likely that I missed a key lore point. If you want to add on to this, comment it down below. I highly recommend you check the video by Wendigoon and the unlisted video by BrayXP. Both of these will be linked down below. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Sorry about the delay between videos. I'm currently working on a Half-Life 2 video again, but progress has been slow between work and school, but I'm getting pretty far with it. Anyway, thanks again for watching.